Alright, so this happened last summer, and I still can't believe how it went down. My friends and I had been planning this sleepover for weeks. It was at Josh's house, which was pretty much the best spot for stuff like this. His house was big, his parents were chill, and there was always plenty of food and space to play physical games. Josh was one of those kids who always had crazy ideas, but we trusted him. He was funny, confident, and usually the one who came up with plans for the group. He made things fun, and we all looked up to him in some way. There were 5 of us that night. Me, Josh, Ryan, Mike, and Ethan. We showed up at around 6 p.m. and just chilled. We did what most teens do, which was order a pizza, play video games, and watch horror movies until things got late. Around 10, Josh's cousin Alex showed up. I didn't think much of it because Alex would always swing by sometimes. He was a few years older, kind of sketchy, but Josh always said he was a good person. Alex hung out for maybe an hour, ate all of our food, and then just left. It was kind of annoying. Josh said something about how Alex was crashing at his place while his parents were out of town, but he wasn't staying the night with us. This made sense, so I didn't care to ask more questions. The rest of the night was pretty boring. We played some card games and eventually decided to sleep in the living room. Josh said his room upstairs was too small for all of us, plus the couch and floor space downstairs were more comfortable. We all set up our sleeping bags, left a few lights on, and fell asleep around midnight. I don't think any of us were completely knocked out though. We were all joking and half awake for a while, shouting explicit things and dirty jokes to make someone across the room laugh. At some point, I woke up to the sound of the sliding glass door in the kitchen opening. It wasn't loud, but it was just enough to snap me out of my half sleep. I figured maybe Josh had gone to get a snack or something, but then I heard muffled voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, so I looked over at Josh, and he was still sleeping in his sleeping bag. Before I could say anything, the living room lights flipped on. Standing there was someone wearing a ski mask and holding a gun. My fight and flight was triggered, and I froze. Behind him was another guy, also masked and carrying a duffel bag. They started shouting, telling us to sit up and stay quiet. We were told to empty our pockets, grab our wallets, and toss everything into the middle of the room. I've never been held at gunpoint, so I felt really nervous, scrambling to do what he said. I couldn't stop staring at the gun in his hand. It wasn't some fake toy, it was real, and he was pointing it right at us. I couldn't understand that it was happening. Josh was trying to act just as scared as the rest of us, but something about the way he kept glancing at the armed robber felt off for some reason. It was like they were making eye contact, almost like they were communicating without saying anything. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the more I watched, the more obvious it became. The robber kept screaming orders, telling us to grab our phones, watches, and anything valuable. He even made Mike dump out his backpack because he said it looked too full. The other guy with the robber started going through the kitchen drawers, grabbing random stuff like Josh's mom's jewelry box. It was chaos. He even started drinking the milk straight out of the carton. This made me panic more because I wanted to laugh, which is messed up. And then he fired the gun. It wasn't at any of us, thank God, but he shot it into the ceiling. The sound was deafening. Ryan started crying, and Ethan couldn't stop shaking. The robber told us to shut up or the next shot wouldn't miss. I couldn't even think straight. The only thing I could do was hope that it would be over soon. After they grabbed everything, the robber and the other guy ran out the door, leaving us sitting there in shock. No one said anything for a while. Josh was the first one to speak, saying something like, "What just happened?" But the way he said it felt so fake, like he was trying too hard to act surprised. That's when Ethan noticed something. Josh's stuff wasn't touched. His phone was still sitting on the coffee table, his wallet was still in his bag, and even his expensive sneakers by the door were still there. It didn't make any sense at the time. Ethan started putting it together out loud, saying how weird it was that Alex the cousin had shown up earlier that night and someone had come back to rob us. He kept saying that it didn't feel random. We all started to connect the dots, and an argument broke out. So we wanted to go find his cousin, but then we were confronted by Josh. He flipped out and started yelling that we were crazy and that it wasn't Alex. None of us were buying it though. Josh was sweating like crazy. He kept saying we needed to call the cops, but Ethan pointed out that Josh didn't even try to stop the robbers, even though he supposedly knew him. It was obvious that Josh had set us up. We ended up calling our parents instead of the cops. None of us trusted Josh to be honest if we involved the police. When our parents got there, Josh was still trying to play the victim, saying we were being paranoid. None of us believed him anymore. Later, we found out that Alex did have a record for stuff like petty theft and breaking into lockers. It wasn't a surprise. Josh had sold us out, and for what? A few $100 worth of phones and wallets? I haven't talked to Josh since that night. None of us have. This happened when I was a kid, about 30 years ago, and I still think about it sometimes. I was around 12 or 13, and my friend Megan invited a few of us over for a sleepover. There were 4 of us. Megan's house wasn't anything special, just a normal suburban place, but it had this attic that we all thought was super cool. That's where we usually hung out when we were at her place. Usually at our sleepovers, we would just talk and hang out. It was nice, and sometimes we would smoke up there because we were kids just trying to be kids. One time, Megan said she found her dad's digital camera in the attic earlier that day. It was one of those chunky cameras with a tiny screen on the back. We thought it was funny how it looked, and Megan said we should mess around with it and take some pictures. We started taking stupid pictures of each other, pretending to pose like models or acting like we were in a scary movie. The flash on the camera was so bright, so everything looked washed out, which made it funnier. We even went down to the basement for a few pictures because we thought it would look creepy. And the basement was dusty and looked kind of gross, so we didn't stay there for long. After a while, we went back into the living room to chill. Megan started scrolling through the pictures on the screen, and at first we were just laughing at how ridiculous we all looked. Then Megan suddenly stopped scrolling and stared at the camera. She showed it to us and said something like, "Who's that?" In one of the pictures, there was a man in the background. He was just standing there near the living room doorway, looking straight at the camera. None of us remembered seeing anyone when we took that picture. Megan wasn't good with stuff like this, so she kept lying to herself and tried to say it was probably a shadow or something. But it didn't look like a shadow. It looked like a man. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, and his face was pale. His expression wasn't angry or anything. It was blank, like he was just watching us. We started freaking out. Megan kept scrolling through the pictures, and it got worse. In the next photo, he was closer. He was in the kitchen doorway, just barely visible. The one after that was worse. He was in the middle of the room, a few feet behind us. None of us had seen him while we were taking the pictures, and the idea that he was just there the whole time made me think of all the possibilities that could have happened. The last picture was the one that made me start crying. It was a picture of me and Emily messing around on the floor, pretending to fight or something. The man was right behind me. His hand was almost on my shoulder. I couldn't stop staring at it. It wasn't blurry or distorted or anything you could explain away. It was clear. His face, his clothes, everything. We all saw it. Megan grabbed a broom and demanded we check the house. Emily wanted to wake up Megan's parents, but Megan said they'd think we were being dumb. We turned on every light and went through the house together, checking every room, closet, and even under the beds. Everything was locked and nothing looked out of place, but none of that made me feel better. Eventually, we woke up Megan's parents. Megan's mom looked freaked out when we told her, but her dad tried to stay calm. He said it was probably just a reflection or something on the camera lens. Megan's dad checked the house and even went out into the backyard with a flashlight, but he didn't find anything. While this was happening, I remember the rest of us sat in the living room, too scared to say much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man's face, the same face in the photos. The next morning, Megan's parents said they were going to call the police. They told us to stay put while they explained everything. But when Megan grabbed the camera to show the pictures to her parents again, they were gone. Every single one of them. The random pictures that were taken before that night were still on the camera, but all the ones we'd taken during the sleepover had disappeared. Everyone and their mom said it was just a glitch on the camera, as the tech back then wasn't that good, but I don't think he believed it. Megan's mom didn't say much after that, but she looked worried. None of us knew what to do. The man in those pictures was real. I know what I saw, and so did the others. After that night, none of us ever went back to Megan's house. We didn't really talk much about it either. I think we were all just trying to forget it ever happened. Megan acted like it didn't bother her, but I could tell it did. We all drifted apart after that, and I haven't spoken to her in years. Everyone didn't want to believe it happened, even the parents. But still to this day, I remember there was that man in those photos, and it was not a dream. This happened when I was around 12 or 13, and it's still one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. We all refuse to talk about it, even to this day. It all started when my friend Jake invited me and a couple of other friends, Marc and Chris, over for a sleepover at his house. Jake lived in this older house on the edge of town. Nothing too weird or creepy, a nice modern home with 4 floors. Jake's mom worked nights, so it was usually just him, his little sister, and their dog Max in the house. We were wild every time we had a sleepover because there were no parents around. That meant we could mess around as much as we wanted, stay up late, raid the fridge, and play dumb games. We were in Jake's room, which wasn't huge, but had enough space for the four of us to lay out our sleeping bags on the floor. We'd been joking around and watching YouTube videos for a while when Marc suddenly sat up and asked where his blanket was. At first, we laughed because Marc always lost stuff, like he'd misplaced his phone while holding it, but we realized his blanket was not anywhere in the room. It wasn't under his sleeping bag, it wasn't shoved in a corner, and it wasn't even in the closet. Everywhere we checked, it was not there. He was annoyed, but grabbed another blanket from Jake's closet, and we went back to watching YouTube videos. We went into the kitchen to make some pizza rolls, and came back about 20 minutes later, and when we did, Chris's blanket was gone. We all just stared at him. No one was laughing now. Jake turned the light on, and we started looking around the room again. Once again, Chris's blanket was completely gone, just like Marc's. We all started to freak out a bit because everybody had gone upstairs to make the food, which wouldn't make any sense how the blanket was gone. We then noticed a torn corner of Marc's original blanket sticking out from under Jake's bed. So I went down to grab the blanket and I heard a loud rustling noise. "What was that?" someone had screamed. When I was leaned down to look under the bed, I realized there was something under there. We played it off thinking that it was the dog because we had not seen him all night. As we were going back upstairs, that's when we noticed the muddy footprints near the window. The window was cracked open just slightly, enough to let breeze in, but there were faint, muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the window towards Jake's bed. We all could have sworn that the window was closed earlier. We decided to get out of Jake's room and sleep in the living room instead. We brought our sleeping bags with us and made sure to lock the door behind us. Max was sprawled out on the couch, and all of a sudden randomly started barking down the hallway into the pitch black. We didn't sleep much that night. We just sat there in a huddle, holding random weapons we had found around the house. Jake's mom came home the next morning, and we told her everything. She believed everything right away, which was nice, but then she noticed the muddy footprints. When she did, she called the police. The cops couldn't find anything at first, though. They said it was probably an animal or maybe a prank, which didn't really make us feel any better. But about a week later, Jake called me and explained that they had found someone in the attic. Apparently, when the police came back for a more thorough search, they found evidence that someone had been living in Jake's house for months. The guy was hiding in the attic and sneaking down at night to steal food, clothes, and apparently blankets for over 4 months. I learned that the guy was what they call a frogger, which basically means somebody who secretly lives in other people's houses. The idea that he was under the bed while we were all sitting there is kind of insane to think about. Back when I was 11, I had a sleepover at my best friend Alyssa's house. She lived just down the street from me, and we went to school together and hung out all the time. So on this night in particular, I walked over to her house sometime in the afternoon like usual. The first part of the sleepover went normally. I don't recall if it was a weekend or just a summer night, but I know that we stayed up pretty late. Alyssa's bedroom was upstairs at the front part of the house. At probably like midnight, we were in Alyssa's room and we noticed something out the window. We could see the street in front of her house and had a pretty good view of it. There was this guy walking down the street, but then he turned around and walked back. He seemed to be almost pacing back and forth between the house past Alyssa's to the right and the one next door to the left. We watched him walking and were wondering what he was doing. None of us knew who he was or recognized him as a neighbor. This was something that was unusual for the street as well. Typically, there were not people walking down the street really late at night. After watching him pacing in the street for several minutes, I remember that he stopped and was kind of looking around. Then he looked up and we were sure that he saw us. He seemed to almost make eye contact with us for a second, and Alyssa and I quickly ducked down. Obviously, we didn't want him to see us, whoever he was. We decided not to look out the window anymore after that. However, probably 2 or 3 minutes later, there was a knock at the front door of the house. We both feared that it was the man right away. Alyssa's parents had gone to bed already, so we were the only ones awake in the house. We ignored the first knock, but there was soon another one. You could not see who was at the front door from Alyssa's window because the front step had a small roof over it. So we decided to go downstairs and see who was there. After making it downstairs, it was very dark in the house, but we didn't turn on any lights. Soon we made it to the front area of the house and to a window. We both looked out and saw the same man from the street standing there. He looked very suspicious because he had a hood covering most of his head and I could barely see his face. and the weather was not bad or anything that would make that seem normal. As we were both looking at him, he suddenly started looking around and then locked eyes with us. It was just like before when he had somehow seen us. We both ducked away from the window at that moment. However, the man then charged for the window that we were at. He reached it and started pounding on the glass. Alyssa and I both ran upstairs and woke up her parents. By the time they got downstairs though, the man was gone. The police were called and they arrived a while later with the man still nowhere in sight. We were afraid that he would return, but he didn't. After that night, we thankfully never saw that man again. We talk about that night all the time still, wondering who he was and what he was doing. I remember one time I went to this sleepover with some friends when I was really young. I'm pretty sure it was one of the kids' birthdays. I don't even remember who all was there though. I knew maybe 3 of the kids out of the probably 7 or 8 that were at the sleepover. What I really remember though was that we all went to sleep in the kids' bedroom. It must have been pretty large to fit us all, and we all had sleeping bags and were on the floor. I fell asleep that night around the time everybody else did, but I remember that I randomly woke up in the night. After being really confused and groggy for a few seconds because I was not waking up at my house, I remembered things. I was at the sleepover still, and it was still the middle of the night. I just looked around the mostly dark room. The only real light came in from the window, which did not have any blinds on it or anything, and that's when I noticed that another kid was up. I can't remember his name. I hadn't really known him that well, but he was standing at the window, and I realized that a person was outside on the other side of the window. This was really strange. The person appeared to be a man, but I couldn't really see. I just laid there and watched, and I noticed that this kid appeared to be talking with the man at the window. I had so many questions, starting with, who was this man? Why was he at the window? And why was this kid talking with him? The obvious guess was that he was possibly going to try to kidnap the kid or something. I remember that at that point, I sat up. This was maybe 10 seconds after first seeing what was going on. At that point, I saw the kid turn around and look at me. Then the man at the window quickly disappeared and ran away. I didn't say anything. I'm not really sure why. Maybe I was just so confused, or maybe I was just truly speechless. Anyways, the kid then walked over, got inside of his sleeping bag, and seemed to go back to sleep. I just turned over and I tried to go back to sleep myself. And eventually, I did. And I didn't hear or see anything else strange. I also was not woken up for the rest of the night. When everybody got up the next morning, we all went to the living room and kitchen for breakfast. I remember that it was then that I saw the kid, and I asked him who was at the window. Surprisingly, the kid completely denied it. He said that he didn't remember going to the window or anything. I told him what happened, and he claimed that I must have been dreaming it. I was so confused. I knew that I wasn't dreaming it, but I didn't say anything else about it for the rest of the time. Well, I ended up seeing the same kid again probably a few months later. It was at another kid's birthday party who we both happened to know. There, I brought it up again. This time, he did not deny it. He told me that he randomly woke up in the night and saw this guy at the window. The guy then waved him over, and he went, thinking that the guy must have been a family member of one of the kids or something. He opened the window, and the guy was telling him to go around and unlock the front door. That's when he saw me, and the guy ran away. He said that he just went to bed after that. He told me that he denied it because he thought he would get in trouble or something. I'm not really sure why, but I'm really glad that the kid didn't listen to the man and unlock the door. And I'm really glad that I woke up when I did.